the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host Paul Spain, and very nice to be joined today by Renee Mateparae. How are you?
Great, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you back again. It's been a little while since we've had you in the Podcast NZ studios.
It definitely has. Glad to be back.
Yeah. Now, maybe you can remind listeners where you fit into this big wide world of technology and innovation here in New Zealand.
Yeah, where I fit into the technology landscape. So I work currently at Spark New Zealand, and I work in the technology team looking at our future connectivity options for New Zealand. So my team are working on all of our wireless networks, so a 4G network, the rollout of 5G, and we've got some super exciting trials in that space. We also look after a lot of the big infrastructure programs that we've got, building out connectivity for New Zealand and how we can handle the ever-increasing demand for data. And also our Internet of Things business, which is super exciting as well. So in short, I get to work on all the cool stuff at Spark and bring new future tech.
That is very, very nice and nice position to be in. I'm sure there'll be a few people that say that they're doing cool stuff that you're not involved in. But
I'm sure.
You've got quite a, there's a lot that goes on at Spark, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely.
But certainly the connectivity piece is just so important, because without it, we're often completely hamstrung and not able to do things.
Yeah, I think COVID really highlighted our dependence on digital communications, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, definitely keen to come back and delve into what you're doing with millimetre wave, because that's the trial you've been working on and that you've announced in the last few days. So we'll come back and onto that and to hear a bit about what else is going on network-wise. But we'll jump into the other news too. Now, I guess something that caught my attention over the last few days was this announcement around what I think the headline referred to as tech giants signing a pact to tackle digital harm. That was certainly how it was headlined by Newsroom. And it was really highlighting this agreement that's come into place through a number of players, sort of Meta, Facebook, Google, with YouTube, TikTok, and Twitch and Twitter. So with them sort of agreeing to this pact that's been put in place by NetSafe and NZ Tech, and when I read this, I thought, wow, this sounds like a good idea. And I was sort of joining up some dots, because in a day or a few days prior to that, there was an article from Stuff that was talking about one of the topics we've talked about on the podcast before, which is these RAM raids. And the mainstream media have been very interested in the RAM raids, and is it technology's fault that they're happening, and is sort of driving this kind of continuous wave of RAM raids that have been really promoted, I guess, through the likes of TikTok as videos have gone out and then have become quite viral.
Yeah, this culture of sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty sure it was Stuff, and what they indicated is they put in a sort of an Official Information Act request, and they'd got this information back from police that highlighted that the police had got hold of TikTok and said, can you take this particular bit of content down, because it's promoting something that actually falls outside of the terms of TikTok in terms of what was going on, and damaging property and so on. And the police had got nowhere with it. It was just basically ignored. And then Stuff send a message off to TikTok saying, why did you ignore this request? And within a few hours,
miraculously,
the content has disappeared, and then we see this agreement coming into place very soon thereafter. So, whilst what we've seen since is a couple of other parties, including Internet NZ, have come in and said, no, this agreement is, I don't know, paraphrasing a little bit, but a sham, and it's it's something to stop the government from putting legislation into place. But to me, it seems like this is a good step.
Well, at least it's a step in the right direction.
It's not the whole solution, right? That there is this commitment that maybe is certainly further down the track than what the police had to have had to deal with in recent months with stuff just going out there. And I mean, we've even had New Zealand's media, and as happens, something goes viral on one of these platforms, and then you'll get a media outlet, TV, online, what have you, that then take that content, which is encouraging this bad behaviour, and then they're spreading it so everybody can see it. The only bit that I haven't actually been able to find recently was there were the headlines around Zuru getting a bit upset with some of the reviews of what it's like to work at Zuru, and so they took the court case in the US against. Can you remember the name of the site that does the Glassdoor?
Oh,
so
yes,
they took the court case against Glassdoor and say you can't publish that. That's
slander.
That's slander, effectively, right?
Yeah.
And you're breaking the law to do that, and they were able to actually block the negative reviewers because I was kind of curious. It was
whether that would actually
I was
work.
like, can I read what are people saying that has upset Zuru
that
so much?
Yeah.
So it's in a way I was sort of pleasantly surprised actually that it hadn't all been republished.
Yeah.
And putting yourself in Zuru's shoes. Look, if they're able to get a court to block it because it's false, then fair enough that it should be able to be blocked. But on the flip side, when it's come to these ram raids, it seems to have just run wild and hadn't been able to be stopped. So
I mean, it's good to see that there's some level of accountability being taken by these big tech giants for some of the content that's on their platforms. It's been an increasing issue over the last couple of years, so at least it looks like it's a step in the right direction. What comes of it, or what needs to happen outside of that, I suppose, is the real question. There's no doubt something has to be done, but it's just how we get the right balance, I reckon.
Yeah, and it's really hard because who do you blame? Do you say, look, this has come over? They were on a Spark Mobile when they did this, or whoever's network, or I'm able to watch it over this network or that network. So where do you put those sort of blocks and things in place? How do you get the right balance? And how much is the responsibility on individuals and families to protect against the harms of online, and how much can we put on to these platforms? And sometimes some things can be somewhat easy to automate, but then sometimes you get the flip side of the coin. And the other day I was talking to my son. We've been arranging he's going to go and stay with one of his friends during the school holidays, and I said, have you put some had a chat with your mate over whatever gaming platform they were on, and the comment was like, I can't put that on there because the AI might pick up what I'm saying if you mention going to someone's home. And then it's like, that could be dodgy. So, and then suddenly he's maybe not able to chat with his friend anymore. Because he's gone,
the safeguards have gone too far.
The boundaries. So, it's really hard to get technology to do these things for us all the time.
Yeah. And to expect that, I think to your point, there's always a role for people to play in just having open conversations with their kids as well about the online environment. Yeah. We've explained it to our kids to try and say, look, we wouldn't take you into the middle of town and just leave you standing in a square full of strangers.
Yeah.
And that's effectively what we'd be doing if we weren't talking to you and understanding what you were doing online.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, we would never do that.
Yeah. Yet when you go online,
that's can effectively
be
what you've got.
A lot of strangers,
Yeah.
And it's interesting, kids will find their own techniques to bypass things too, won't they? So,
I think that's part of being a kid.
Yeah. Now, on to some of the other topics. Ford have announced cutting a huge chunk of their salaried workforce. And what they've done with their business is to effectively sort of split into, I guess you could say, the new, edgy, cool, disruptive kind of end of Ford, which is doing electric vehicles and autonomous driving technology, all of the sort of the edgier stuff. And then the part of Ford that's their traditional business, which we call ICE these days, the vehicles with the internal combustion engines, right? And, of course, there's elements of those vehicles that use all the latest and greatest elements, but we certainly see those electric vehicles being at the more digital, edgy end of things. So, talking about plans to slash 8,000 salaried workers, which is around a quarter of their workforce by 2026. So, I find this is really fascinating, because this is, part of the challenge that I think all businesses have is, how do you keep your eye on the future and invest into the future things whilst not killing off existing revenue streams? And we've seen it with Sky. There's elements of it probably within every business. Spark with Spark Ventures, as the sort of the place to develop those exciting new things. But when I saw that headline of like, wow, that's a lot of people to be letting go for your new thing, but also there's a reality, right? And Ford have they did really well through sort of the global financial crisis and so on, without having to get the big handouts and certainly without hitting the wall anyway. I'm not sure what their handouts were. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was I was scrolling through the article and trying to see, you can understand them cutting work on one side on the legacy part of the business, but it doesn't then cover off how many staff they're adding on the new side. And I think there's a really interesting conversation going on at the moment in business on actually how do we be better at reskilling our existing workforces to shift from old legacy technologies into the new innovative stuff, and how do we help to get our team members those future focused skills so that they can shift into new roles, whether it's in their existing company or somewhere else. And I think that was the bit in here in the article that was missing for me. They're cutting on one side, but they must be adding on the other.
Well, they're definitely adding some investment, but exactly what that looks like in terms of people, it's hard to know. We heard of a change Tesla made recently where they laid off, there's maybe 100 people or so within an AI team. So they were there to look at video and images and then label things accordingly. But of course, in this world where we're trying to automate as much as possible, and it had got to the point where the artificial intelligence systems had got to the point where they were doing as good enough, they were trained up well enough that actually that group was no longer needed. So look, even with the latest and greatest stuff, we will see things where you need a bunch of people to get you there, but then there's going to be a need to retrain or to find another company that's maybe needs those skills.
When it comes back to that whole concept of continuous learning, right? We're going to all be continuously learning new stuff to go and do different things.
Yeah, and look, I think we all should be all the time, and whether that's within what we do today, or whether it's sort of in preparation for the future, right? We've all got to be putting on that futurist hat and looking at what's that futurist view of the work that we do today, the business that we're in, and then what does that look like tomorrow, and then individually and for our families, because if you do that, you've kind of got the best chance of positioning yourself well, both in terms of what we can do generally to help New Zealand do better and our economy do better, as for each individual's success as well, right?
Yeah, it must be hard being a career advisor at the moment for kids. There's so many different new jobs all the time. That's got to be the trickiest one to stay on top of.
It'd be fun though, wouldn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Because it is changing, so it's not. You can't just give the same old advice.
Yeah.
For an extended period of time.
Exactly.
SpaceX, and we'll try and avoid Elon and some of the smutty stuff that's been in the media or whatever you want to say about Elon over the last little while. But we can talk about his companies. And I saw that SpaceX have broken their annual launch record. So they've done 32 launches this year, and here we are. We're only, just past middle of the year.
Yeah.
And I think that is pretty mind-blowing. And, we'd heard from Rocket Lab around, the potential pace of launches that Rocket Lab would be able to get to, sort of launches every 2 or 3 days sort of thing. And you work that out, it's like, oh yeah, that could be, it could be 100 odd launches a year. Of course, these are on a different scale to SpaceX, but as someone that uses Twitter, I've been really surprised over the past few weeks of, how often I'm on Twitter and then it's like, oh, is that another SpaceX launch? Is that more, satellites going up or what have you? Like, it just seems constant. And I guess at 32 launches in under 7 months.
Yeah.
We're talking, more than a launch a week, right?
Yeah.
It's just mind blowing how
pretty
things
impressive.
have really sped up, and to be, potentially doubling or in that direction for the year. Wow, because it's not as though SpaceX were being slackers or anything when it came to launches, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's something that we didn't even really talk about at all. Rockets launching not that long ago, and now it seems to be always in the news.
Yeah. It's just constant.
Yeah.
And of course, there's been great stuff going on with Rocket Lab and their involvement in the moon launch and their continued work going on behind the scenes, which is pretty exciting. And they're definitely, it's well worth following them and Peter Beck on Twitter, if you're a Twitter user, just to keep up with it, because I guess it is so constant that there isn't room for it to be covered in the main, media, a lot of the time, because it's just another rocket launch, it's this, it's that, because it's happening every day. But if you're not kind of keeping an eye on it, then you potentially kind of miss what sort of, revolution is actually, going on as far as space is concerned.
I think, it's kind of cool how it can inspire Kiwi kids, I'm finding at the moment, to be, they've never really thought about being rocket engineers before, but now there's, awesome clips on YouTube they can watch, and it'll be pretty cool to see what turns out in the next decade.
Yeah, I remember, growing up seeing the would have been a space shuttle launch. I can't. Maybe it was the first space shuttle launch.
An Apollo mission.
Don't remember the Apollo missions, I've got to say. Maybe there'll be somebody in my family that does, but it wasn't quite my era, but it was such a big deal, right? As it would have been, if, with Apollo launches and so on. But now I'll try and convince my son to sort of, oh look, we've got it live. This is happening right now. This rocket's launching.
Yeah. And
he's looking for something else to do. It's like it's just become so everyday, so pedestrian. It's like, wow, it's amazing how things have advanced. And a really key part of it, of course, is the technological change that makes it's so possible. Easy is probably not the right word, because you look at what Rocket Rocket Lab has achieved, and you look at all the other companies, and there are a lot of them around the world that are trying to do things in space.
Yeah. And
most of them aren't doing very much in space at all, and yet Rocket Lab it just continues to. SpaceX can continue to. The Chinese are really moving forward in terms of the things that they're doing and their own space station and so on. So it's like there are a few areas where there is incredible success and innovation, and yes, we can say the technology makes it quicker, easier, cheaper, but it's still really hard, right?
Yeah. You certainly can't underestimate that.
I also saw that Facebook are being hauled into court. So Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg are set to be in court in relation to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which is sort of a highlight of how fast the world moves today, but how slow traditional things like court processes move. I guess it'd be similar to look at .com's situation. I mean that was when did he get arrested? I think it was in the very early days of the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Maybe maybe we were a year old or something, and there was this big thing at the .com mansion for their new thing, and that was a period of time on from the arrest. So courts move very, very slow, and when you kind of think about that, how does that work in a world which is actually moving really, really quickly? It's brings us to these challenges like what we were talking about at the beginning. That kind of agreement of the social media and online firms sort of agreeing to a code of conduct, and it sort of with that pace, it does bring you back to actually there is some wisdom to having some interim steps to law changes and so on when we know
legislation
how
catches up.
Slow these things happen, right?
Yeah.
Now we heard about a chess robot breaking a child's finger this week. Is this the future that we should all expect as everything becomes
definitely not
robotic?
Definitely not. I think that was a really interesting article, and it shows the limits that there still are around robotics and how they interact with people, and making sure that you've got the right health and safety measures in place, for sure. Very unfortunate situation.
Yeah, I was kind of curious when I read the headline, like, okay, robotic chess player, how would
Thinking
that
work?
One
of those doomsday films.
Probably got a yeah.
It wasn't quite that though.
No, well, you've basically got this, robot arm that can pick up chess pieces and move them around, and if you end up with putting your hand out and getting sort of caught in this pretty dumb robot mechanism, like obviously there's an element of AI to the game playing, and there's an element of AI to a robotic arm, but it looked more like the sort of arm that you see in a factory, not like a person's arm, right? So you want to stay clear of that while it's doing its job, just as you would if you're in a Tesla factory or any other big factory where there are computers doing their work, right?
In factory, I mean, they're still trying to work out in industry how you can create safe spaces where you can have robots and people kind of co-working or working in the same spaces, and there's got to be lots of rules of engagement almost around how different people interact and where you can go and can't go. Is one of the emerging use cases around 5G is that industrial IoT and helping to improve the analytics that sit behind the robotics so that they can use AI to detect things like a kid's finger getting in the way so that they can have a safety to cut it off. And it is that advancement of technology to cut the robot off.
Okay, just checking.
to
just
stop
checking
the robot.
Very
good point. Poor use of language.
Yeah, look, I mean, it is fascinating, and depending on the use cases, we will kind of see probably a whole variance of sort of safety levels. I remember going through factories for Huawei and Oppo in China, and the Huawei one, they really wanted to. It was kind of a demonstration of what robotics could do. So they had 90% of the process was automated and robotic, and they were very proud of that because at that time anyway, the percentage that was automated of an iPhone factory was much, much lower. So it was sort of their way of showing, hey, we're at the forefront sort of thing. And there were 10, 12 people involved as well, but most of it was robotics. But one of the robots was a little sort of wheeled machine that would come around and I think would maybe collect the boxes full of phones once they'd been filled up. And of course, having that kind of interest, what happens if you stand in the way of the robot? And of course it's like a operational autonomous vehicle. It grinds to a halt rather than crushing you and destroying you.
Well, that's good.
Which was quite pleasing. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
I think that's probably
today.
what they were hoping would happen. I mean, we had a really cool trial recently at Spark working with EnviroWest, and so that was looking at a video camera footage of the transfer station or the Kiwi dump, and identifying where there might be people that would be getting into harm's way. So surprisingly, when people go to the dump in Auckland and around New Zealand, sometimes people will spot they might drop a phone or their keys down into where they're throwing the rubbish, or they might spot something that they want to jump in and grab, and so they will occasionally get people jumping over the barriers and down into where the rubbish is, and there's these huge heavy machinery down there. So the AI was sitting on top of the camera and able to then detect what people were doing, and it could even predict that somebody looked like they might be about to jump into the pit, and sound an alarm so that it could keep people safe. And so there's some really cool examples of where we're applying the technology from a health and safety perspective actually to identify and help keep people safe.
Love it. Yeah, that's really cool. And those are the sorts of things that as these things progress, we can do more down that front, and hopefully without with the technology doing a good enough job that it doesn't cause too much disruption as well, right?
Unobtrusive. You don't have to worry about it being there. You can just be comfortable that your site's going to be safe, for example.
Yeah. Oh, that's neat. Now, Didi, the big Chinese ride-hailing firm or ride-sharing firm, whatever you want to call it, once an Uber competitor, but of course, I guess they still are to a degree in some markets, but Uber no longer operating in China. They have been fined in China $1.2 billion US dollars, which is I guess around 2 billion New Zealand dollars today. So a pretty huge sum, and their cyberspace administration of China said they had found conclusive evidence against the company, and Didi went and listed on the New York Stock Exchange last year, but the rug was sort of pulled out from under them, and they had to kind of step back from that. And I just find some of these things that are going on, it's really hard to work out how much of this is sort of political and a bit of a warning to a company of, look, we want you to operate within certain constraints that kind of, suit from a political perspective, that suit, the Communist Party. And how many of these things are actually, genuinely, companies that are doing really, really dodgy stuff. And I guess they've not only been fined, but they were, they had to pull their app from app stores in China and so on. So pretty messy situation for Didi, which as an innovative technology company, that's do a few of these sort of things, and you can soon destroy a firm, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of two sides to it, right? The cybersecurity is just becoming increasingly a non-negotiable for companies to take really seriously, and certainly that's been highlighted over the last couple of years around the need to get the right advice in the cybersecurity space, make sure that you're talking to the right people. But then it also just highlights the geopolitical environment at the moment, right? There's so many things going on in the world that nothing's clear cut these days.
Yeah, and I mean we've seen a bit more online over the past sort of week or so around Huawei in the US, and there's been a bit of new information sort of that's come out there. Suggesting that Huawei were sort of investing over and above what you might expect to put infrastructure into certain rural locations in the US that maybe happen to line up with where military installations were, and even some references back to US nuclear capabilities. So it's a pretty complex field to understand exactly where these things cross over.
Yeah.
And who can you trust? Well, kind of nobody, right? Because we see whether it's US, where we're talking about cybersecurity. They had a firm that was outsourced to capture license plate information at the borders, and AI to kind of read that information, and that's quite important from a security standpoint. That if you're collecting all sorts of information about where different vehicles are at a particular time, that shouldn't just be wide open, but it was. And then we've heard similar situations with China on government front. So we can't trust our governments, we can't trust private firms. It's
I'm sure we can.
It's a big challenge.
I think there's two sides to technology, right? There's the tricky side where it can be used for nefarious means, but then there's also the side where it helps to make lives so much simpler and easier. Like the license plate example, it's awesome that I can drive into the car park and I don't even need to get a ticket now because it recognises my license plate and it knows how long I've been there.
Yep.
That just makes life so much more seamless. So
and you love how
I'm
that's
focusing
tied
on
back
that
to
stuff at the moment.
Sorry, I was going to jump in and say, you love how that keeps track of exactly what hours you're in work or somewhere or not, and you get pinged when you haven't been there enough. No, it's interesting. I was reading around. I think it was as Tesla, where they've been sort of encouraging people to come back to work, but maybe encouraging might be a softer word than some of Elon's commentary. And I was thinking, well, how do they figure that out? And then I read that they were looking at staff basically swiping in and out of the office as the kind of the automated way to do it. So I guess all of these things have they can have an upside, but it's also can you
the ethics around it, I think.
how do you get that balance right and without making people sort of feel uncomfortable about the data you're collecting or how you use it.
It's a very real situation that we have to make sure we're open about.
Yep, but as you say, lots of good, and car parking type stuff. That's very, very handy. And was it Z, where you can turn up, and if you're using their app and you've got your number plate in there, you can have it automatically dispense fuel if your vehicle turns up or somebody else turns up with a copy of your number plate stuck over theirs. Then
don't give people ideas. If you walk into the Kori Lounge and you can get sent a notification to order your coffee. Yeah. All of these good things.
There are lots of good things. Yeah. We just have to keep our eyes and ears open to the risks, don't we?
Yeah.
Another front with China, we've been hearing a little bit around the sort of autonomous vehicles and autonomous taxis in China, and there's been a bit out and about over the last few days from Baidu, big sort of tech giant in China, showing off their next vehicle, which is going to be joining their autonomous taxi fleet. And what are they calling it? The Apollo RT6. And the comment is that it has the road skills of a driver with 20 years experience. Now, of course, there's a couple of ways of taking that. Like, somebody with 20 years experience, well, after 20 years, some people maybe get a little bit lazy in sort of following the road rules. Others would say, well, when you're a little bit newer and cautious, it's better. I guess the gotcha for me was that it sounds like it's maybe a year away for this particular tech to hit the street. Second half of 2023.
That still seems pretty early to have a fully autonomous vehicle cruising around the streets, right? Robo-taxi?
They're talking about a small-scale trial at that time. Yeah. So they sort of talk it up, and the photos and the picture of where there's, the steering wheel's been taken away from the vehicle, and it sounds really neat. And, and then it's like, pricing-wise, it sounds like, and who knows whether you'll ever be able to buy these things directly anyway if they're designed for an autonomous fleet. This particular one, the Apollo RT6, looks around 60,000 New Zealand dollars as a kind of ex-tax price of maybe it's 70K and get it to New Zealand sort of thing, and then probably wouldn't quite know what to do on our roads. But 8 LiDAR sensors and varying other things, 12 cameras. So
ultrasonic sensors,
fascinating to sort of see the different approaches. You've still got Tesla and a number who are still down this track of just need cameras. That's how humans drive, is by vision. You don't need a whole lot of other sensors. And then you've got others who are very much down the track of LiDAR. When the price of the vehicle could be that sort of price, 70,000 New Zealand dollars. If you can do that and have 8 LiDAR and 12 cameras, ultrasonic sensors, what they call a wave radar, if you can have all of that in a vehicle, in a $70,000 vehicle, and it is kind of interesting that there's maybe so much effort by Tesla not to do that. Now, understandable when each LiDAR might have cost you $10,000 US. There's no way you could have had 8 LiDARs, but the price of technology comes down. So,
well, I think the interesting thing in the autonomous vehicles is what you can do once you take away the need to drive the car, the stuff you can do inside it. And so seeing some of the concept vehicles that the automobile companies have got, how you just can completely rethink the inside of the car, because you've all of a sudden you don't need to be sitting facing the road, for example. You can be sitting facing each other in the vehicle, and all of a sudden it just completely changes driving experience. Totally.
Or having a nap, right? I'm still dreaming of, want to go somewhere, go down, fall asleep, and I guess it's a little bit like the perfect plane journey to another part of the world where, sit down, have
Jump
a
in a
meal,
pod.
fall asleep,
Yeah.
and then you wake up and you're on the other side of the world somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So the equivalent at basically, low cost with a standard vehicle, being able to do that around the country could be pretty cool. I guess we have a variation of that with sort of buses that you can, you can sleep on, or what have you, intercity type things. But there we go. Now there were a couple of other things I was hoping to drill into. Maybe we'll just cover one more, and then keen to get an update from what's happening in the Spark world and talk about millimetre wave. But there was news around a GPS tracker unit that's available for around 30 New Zealand dollars, and apparently there are hundreds of thousands of these things, or of customers for this particular unit called Microdus MV720. It's a very low cost unit, so that's why there's lots of customers. Apparently about 1.5 million units of them out there, used in just about every country in the world, and across everything from just consumer use to law enforcement, military, and government use. But it's turned out that people should stop using these units immediately, because they're able to be easily controlled by hackers, and they get used to control vehicles. So scenario where someone takes control of this tracker and then messes with locations, cuts off fuel to a vehicle, or disarms alarms and other bits and pieces.
Quite an alarming story.
Yes, some lessons there around where you source products from, and making sure that look, sometimes it makes sense to be using very low cost technology, but you've also got to keep a track on where it is and how you're managing it, and what do you do when a vulnerability is found, because when it's a $30 unit, it may well not sort of auto patch itself and auto update, or even able to be secured in any sort of way, which sounds like that's a situation here.
Yeah, I think particularly in the Internet of Things space, when we're connecting more and more things, and also more and more critical things like power meters and water and stuff like that, you have to make sure that you're really, really clear on the security of the devices, and to your point, making sure that it can be upgraded as you need, as vulnerabilities are found. It's incredibly important.
Yeah, and recognising that something that you put in today might not last for a decade or a long period of time, and working that in. Now, tell us about millimetre wave. Now, this was, I guess, one of the areas of 5G that we heard about reasonably early on was millimetre wave, and this potentially the ability to give us huge amounts of bandwidth into I guess my initial impressions of it was millimetre wave is what we might see in the cities as a sort of a competitor to fibre broadband, able to deliver really high speeds, in dense urban areas. But you've been doing a trial that's actually quite different to that.
Very different.
Is this the first time that we've had a millimetre wave 5G technology sort of tested in New Zealand?
Yeah, so this is the first time we've trialled millimetre wave. We're using test spectrum that we've loaned from the government so that we could test out some of its capabilities.
Thank you, government.
Yep, very much. And so 5G, when you roll it out, can be used across a whole range of spectrum. And generally the way it works, I'm sure lots of your listeners will know this, but the higher you get in frequency, the less far the signal will travel. And so millimetre wave is the highest frequency range for 5G, and actually 4G all sits down in sort of what we know as the mid and low band spectrum. Millimetre wave is up in the high band. So it goes really fast but doesn't tend to travel that far. So what we trialled here was to look at, we were seeing some emerging use cases around long-range use of millimetre wave in rural environments. And so we partnered with Nokia, who build a lot of our cell sites in the 5G space, to test out their new millimetre wave radio, and then also the external antennas that pick up the signal. And so we set up a site that had 2 sectors at Mouse Point in North Canterbury. And what we then did was drive tests to look at differing distances away from the site, what were the speeds that we could get. And we were really pleasantly surprised. So the peak speed that we saw was 2.4 gigabits per second, which is pretty fast. And that was standard. 3 kilometres away from the site, which is great. Yeah. And so if you think your standard mobile phone speed might be in the hundreds of megabits per second if you're in a pretty good coverage area, 2.4 gigabits per second is a huge increase. And then going further away, we also got just over 1 gigabit per second when you were getting 7 kilometres away from the site, which is a really long range.
That's awesome, because 7 kilometres, give or take, if I recall correctly, and it's been a while since I had to deal with a copper connection, but that was kind of about the limit for a ADSL connection, or certainly for a VDSL connection. You'd be completely stuffed at that point, and you'd be struggling to get, probably, I don't know, you certainly wouldn't be getting 10 megabits per second, let alone a gigabit over that sort of range. So it's pretty cool. So
we've done the part of the testing where we test the speeds at different distances, and then the next part of the test we're working with PGG Wrightson to use that coverage to then set up sort of hotspots in some of their stores that are within the coverage range, and then to test out the actual use cases kind of for people connecting. So they saw quite a lot of opportunities, both from creating access to fast connectivity in rural situations, but they were looking at opportunities to use their stores as a hub. So you'd be able to go into the store and get access to really fast internet. And then also looking at opportunities around how they could do sort of HD streaming, live streaming of some of their livestock auctions. There's a new platform that they've been launching. So there's some really cool examples of how once you kind of give the capability to have high-speed connectivity into some of these more remote areas, what you can manage to do with it. So that'll be the next interesting thing. I think millimetre wave, normally people think about it using it in high-density scenarios, so like you're saying, in urban centres. And so we'll be looking over the next 12 to 18 months to highlight those sorts of use cases. But this was a great one to do first cab off the rank, just to show that it's not just about urban centres. Actually, we'll be able to use this technology to deliver proper 5G out all over New Zealand.
Yeah, and so in those cases, was it quite sort of focused in one direction in order to do that? So in a normal sense with a cell site, you're trying to get a sort of a broad radius.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. So it does use new technology around how you target the antennas or the signal towards devices, definitely, to make it work better. And as I say, it was definitely a Kiwi experiment. We had the engineers had a truck that had the external aerial on the top of the truck, with a modem inside reading speed. So it was a lo-fi experiment, but cool to see the results and then kind of think about the potential for it in future.
Yeah, and those sort of rural cell sites, how are those generally connected today? You've got fibre has sort of been the norm, hasn't it, for connecting cell sites together?
Yeah, I mean, a lot will be still using copper connections, and we're increasingly adding connectivity options, both through the upgrade programs we're doing in rural with our 4G spectrum, and also obviously through the Rural Connectivity Group, RCG, where we work in partnership with the other network operators to provide coverage in really remote locations and also in highway black spots and things like that, where you just really need coverage. I think Kiwis are now expecting that kind of no matter where you go in New Zealand, you expect that your phone will still get coverage. You sometimes forget there's still parts of the country where we haven't quite managed to reach yet.
Yeah, and look, you're part of that rural connectivity group with Vodafone and 2 Degrees. I noticed I was looking at a potential road trip that has been slightly postponed to summer with all the rubbish weather. And one of the areas I was looking at was Haast.
Oh, yeah.
And, looking around that area, the connectivity is definitely on the lighter end. So this is where the mobile black spot sort of investment, I guess, as it keeps rolling out, fills in more gaps and leaves us a bit safer if you have an accident or you run out.
You're at least closer to getting into coverage. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. When I was actually looking at that, it was interesting how there seemed to be lots of coverage kind of offshore into the water, I guess, based on where cell sites were, but I guess based on the topology and so on.
We tend to fire it towards the ground, so we try and send the signal so that it is catching more of the people on the ground with their cell phones as opposed to the animals out at sea.
Yeah, well, it was just interesting that it appeared to be a whole bunch of sort of coverage out at sea, but once you got much back from the shore in some of those areas, it was a bit variable. So that work continues. Now, I'm sure some folks will be a little bit curious, and this might not be sort of your area specifically, but I'm sure you know a thing or two about it, is the cell sites getting sold off. So how does that sort of, how does that play out in the future with the, towers sort of sitting under TowerCo, basically?
Yeah, there are a lot of markets globally where we've seen the same thing happen. So New Zealand, I would say, is certainly not a world leader in going down this path. What we hope will happen as a result is that we will really unleash the ability for those businesses as infrastructure companies to be able to build infrastructure across New Zealand in the way that's most cost effective for New Zealanders. And it means that we as the telecommunications, as the network operator, can focus on making sure that we get coverage to the right places at the right time. And so, I think creating that split between accountabilities of infrastructure and making sure that we're building in the right places and potentially being able to put more than one operator onto any given site will be a great outcome for New Zealand overall. You don't necessarily want 2 towers in the same place for 2 different operators. If you can have both of them on one, that's great outcome for Kiwis.
Yeah. So in terms of how those agreements are done, it's not sort of excluding other
networks
not at all, coming in and using that infrastructure. So there's kind of
built to try and encourage it, really. Yeah. And I think that's what drives the best outcome for us as Kiwis, making sure that we get good infrastructure investment into New Zealand so that we can build the right technology infrastructure for us going forward.
Yeah, well, we've got a reasonably large country with a fairly
tiny
small population, haven't we? So, you say compared to the UK, where I'm not sure the exact land mass, but it's not dramatically different, to
I think it's even smaller
ours,
than New Zealand, isn't it?
And then their population, again, my loose figures, but, 10 times ours.
Yeah.
And, yet we're certainly not paying 10 times what they pay for, for mobile use. But there are some economies of scale, that other markets get. And, making these changes, if it ends up working well, then hopefully we end up with more for less. I'm sure Spark doesn't want it to be less, but these are the market factors, right? Prices keep going down.
A really important thing. I mean, I was just sharing with you earlier today that I've just today come from an event that Spark ran, which was called an all-in event. And so that was essentially like a hackathon, but it was bringing as many people from Spark as possible to look for solutions to the challenge of the digital divide and digital equity. And so we are a country that has a massive landmass and not very many people, but we've got to make sure that all of the people across both motus have got equal or equitable access to technology. And unless we can help to try and address some of that digital divide, it'll just get bigger and bigger over time. So it's a pretty important thing to make sure that we're making the changes in our industry that are needed so that we can get the best economics for the country going forward, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's quite challenging in terms of what is the right way to go about doing that. And we are moving forward though. It seems, and I think it's really cool that Spark, put that energy and effort into solving some of these challenges.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the ideas that come out of the day.
Yeah. Oh, that's very, very cool. Well, it's been great to catch up again, Renee. Anything else you wanted to mention?
No, I think that it's been really cool just talking about some of the future innovations that are coming. And we've got lots of exciting stuff on the slate over the next couple of months. So it's really, I feel very fortunate to be in the tech space at the moment in New Zealand, where we're starting to sort of stretch our muscles and push the boundaries a little bit and do things in the best interest for New Zealand overall. Yeah,
definitely. It's certainly not a boring field to be in at the moment. There's lots going on. And hopefully we kind of, we get things right in terms of predicting where things are heading and we make, positive moves that end up having an overall, uplift for New Zealand in general and
make sure stuff's more on that light side of the coin, right? The great side of technology.
Yeah, well, I guess we have to talk and delve into those challenges so that we can, have that awareness and address accordingly. You can't just kind of shut them out and pretend that everything that happens with technology is all good and safe. But for me, I think you want to have as much focus as you can on what are the things that are going to bring that positive uplift from leveraging the latest and greatest of technology. But certainly without closing your eyes or ignoring the risks on the
getting
flip
the balance right. Totally agree. Thank you for having me there. It's been fun.
It's been great to catch up. So thank you again for being on the show, and thanks to our show partners that include Spark, Vodafone, 2 Degrees, HP, Gorilla Technology, Cyclone, and Aruba. So thanks everyone for listening in. And we'll look forward to catching you again next week. Of course, if you are about on a Tuesday afternoon, most weeks you will find there's a video live stream. So if you're listening to the audio podcast, then you can catch the live stream video across LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. I think that's all of them. Or if you're watching the live stream now and you haven't caught the podcast, fire up your podcast app and you can get access to the audio episodes to listen to while you're commuting, exercising, doing the dishes, mowing the lawns, whatever it is. So, hey, that's us. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Renee.
Thanks, Paul.
Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.